Today we're looking at some of the collection of the most definitive Aleister Crowley biography by scholar Tobias Churton. Okay, so today you can see quite a nice little collection here, and what's impressive is this is not even the complete collection. These are only the ones that I've gotten my hands on so far. Tobias has written, I think, 5 definitive collections, so I think the final one at this point of the recording is still coming out. It should be released through Inner Traditions. Prior to that, there was almost like an overview, like a Kickstarter one, and I'm speaking under correction on the format and the order of which this can be read, but the way I kind of have had it would be Beast in Berlin, to America, to India, to England. Now again, I stand under correction, so if you know the correct order, please kind of pop them in the comments below. But fundamentally, I wouldn't say, like, I think it matters. I think it is important because it gives you a little context, but the way these are written, you can kind of pop in at any point that you want to know. Let me kind of preface this that's saying this is not like a magical piece. This is a scholarly work. It is a historical biography on Crowley, and in my opinion, the most definitive one that is out there in the market. And I honestly don't think anyone is going to improve upon this unless new knowledge is somehow discovered. But one of the things that made, I think, Tobias one of the best choices in this, if you're looking for a research point to understand Crowley properly in perspective of the time period, this is definitely the way to go. He not only, after he wrote the first biography, he went ahead and created a film specifically. Now, there was quite some controversy around this. There's a little bit of a touch on it in the interview that I do with him. But in essence, this also opened the opportunities for him to get letters and copies of things that weren't really kind of public domain, very specifically, that allowed him a very deeper insight into Crowley as an individual. And the nice thing is, as well, like, he's a scholar from Oxford. He's gone through that kind of training process in critical thinking. So it's a very analytical point of view, and it's very well put in perspective. So let's kind of break these down so we can kind of focus in one piece at a time. So firstly, Berlin kind of really does describe quite a couple of interesting points of things. It highlights that just leading up towards the war, Crowley was pretty much the only Englishman at the time to ever have his artwork kind of published in a time period in a place where, you know, art was really, Berlin was the center point of the world for kind of the artistic revolution. So inside of this, I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of view over the index. You know, the best way to really kind of get through these books, they're just so detailed. They really are almost like historical manuals of the man and his life in detail. There is that kind of looking at, you know, Crowley in this context. Who is the Beast in Berlin? Scoop selling Aleister Crowley, New Age in Germany, Theosophy. In Germany, Aleister Crowley meets the German New Age, kind of like how that moves in. Karl Germer and the Veda Conference. The Arrival in Honolulu. And I bastardized that name quite badly, but that's okay. Karl Germer, Thelma Verlach. A lot of these kind of very interesting historical figures in terms of that context. Then we move over to the Cosmopolis, which is coming like City of the Future. Goodbye to all that. Hello again to all that. A little bit of a back and forth journey. King and Exiles Are Always Beggars. The Stunt Hits and the Fans. Quantum Magus, Nick Carter, and the Case of the Reappearing Wife. Chapter 9, The Old Master, Modern Art in Berlin, The Artist in Berlin. Chapter 10, Hannah Yegan, Save Our Souls. Thoroughly, on Chapter 11, Modern Magus, A View on the Ninth Degree. 12, The Lost Summer of Freedom, Blunderstorm. towards the exhibition. This is where Crowley's first exhibit kind of landed, or his exhibit in Berlin landed. Porsa Mali Iga, Hope of Harvest, the Great Crowley movie collection. Spying, again, something that kind of correlates to some of the others in the series. Lost Orders, Jean Ross, Discovery of the Neutron, Lost Time, Lost Paintings, Lost People, Before Hitler Was, I Am, and Rebirth in the Spirit of Return. Here there's also quite an exploration and a kind of depiction also of Crowley inside of not only Berlin at the time, but something that really kind of leads into the impact of his interest almost in the scientific endeavors, meaning Einstein kind of discovering like the scientific view at the time period, Karl Gerber, how his influence and almost sabotaging and infiltrating in certain ways that aspect of the world. It's a what I love here is that it's such a nice kind of like a look back or depiction of that period versus just somebody's modern day kind of interpretation of things. Even down to what I really liked, I just want to show you, and I'm not going to go spend too much time on that, but real depictions of his paintings and what was up in that exhibit and the stating of that that the Porza exhibit, which again was just beautiful. I'm not going to show everything here out of respect for the author. So just a nice kind of collection there. So very good kind of perspective in that sense. You can see where my reading bookmark is, where I'm in this. Very lovely kind of piece. Really enjoyed it. So then what that kind of leads us into, at least for my reference, is the really big one. And even though this one probably doesn't have, you know, there's more I think that happens in many areas, but there's a lot of back and forth between in and out of America inside of this piece. And obviously America was quite a big deal kind of period, and a lot of influence for Crowley later on in terms of this as it grows. But I like the title in that: Art, Espionage, Sex Magic in the New World. The Adventure, A Special Relationship, Diplomat Marquis, Recruit at Cambridge, Crowley and the Carlists, Crowley and MacGregor Mathers, The Song of the Seas, Out of the Frying Pan and Into New York, The Eagle and the Snake, Mexico City. It's an interesting kind of journey with Crowley into Mexico and the influences that had on him. Chevalier O'Rourke and the Mexican Herald. This is a very interesting thing about how he maybe didn't stand for certain pieces, but wrote for the Mexican Herald under this kind of pseudonym. The Mother of Tragedy, Return to New York, Art in America. Then we move into part 2. The Sinews of War is kind of like just pre the big war. German comes shopping. Meanwhile in London, cap in hand, to the Savage of the Crowleys, which is quite an interesting thing where he looks at the bad press that surrounded him as well at the time. My egg was addled when the paper said, lower into the water, the magic of New York Christmas, with John O'Hara, Kroska and Evangeline Adams and Frank Cronshield, towards the fatherland, into the dark lair, getting in with the Germans, and Musterberg, getting hotter, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love, the Lustani, 16 Jean, the Statue of Liberty stunt, Norman Service resumes, The Wrong Thing at the Right Time, The Way West, Vancouver, California welcomes the world, Replacement Therapy, The Spy Game. It's a very nice kind of journey into the kind of like concept of him being a spy. Was he a spy? Was he not? He is, again, this is a very scholarly work, so he doesn't make any assumptions. He kind of just lays out the evidence and the data, allowing you to kind of make your own perceptions and your assumptions of the man. California welcomes the world. We did that. The Owl and the Monkey went to sea. Philadelphia and the Elixir of Life. Aleister Crowley, Psychedelic Summer. Dr. Crowley, The Night Tripper. Another Crowley, Another Place. The Book T, so the Book of the Tarot. The Book of Thoth, the Ball of Fire. Strauss's Batroco. Crowley on Christ, some of the interesting perspectives there. Nothing with Twinkles, and then move to New Orleans or Bust. Quite a big volume, this one. The Butterfly Nest, Suffer the Little Children. This was quite an interesting story about some of the tragedy in Crowley's life that was also misrepresented International, The Secret Service Interview, Enter the Camel, It's All in the Egg, Unholy Holiness at 64A West 9th Street, Meeting Lee Herschich, Eva Tango, The Island, The Red Strikes Vision, The Blue Equinox. Moving into part 3, The Escape, Genius Row, Thelema in Detroit, The Summer of Montauk, and 1,000 Years Ago. Then Endgame, Legacy, The OTO in America, The Church of Thelema, Jack Parsons, Rocketman, L. Ron Hubbard, covering that, Whatever Happened to the Beast in America. This is a very interesting kind of exploration, as many of, if you've read Demons of the Flesh, and if you're, familiar with the Jack Parsons story, this also kind of dives in quite nicely to that entire role, because many, I don't know if you know, but many people, the journey of L. Ron Hubbard, from which Scientology was based on, was rooted in the sex magic with Jack Parsons, influenced by Crowley. So it's a very interesting piece to kind of go into and explore that as well. Again, this one is just a breath of a volume. It is such a giant piece of work, and it's definitely going to take some serious bit of time for the avid reader to kind of work through. Just love the kind of the photography of the period as well, to kind of just really help put you in that space and that time, looking at some of his poetry and his writing, and really exploring very much what was going on inside the person and the time period then, and these individuals that worked in at that point. For example, Carter, why he wasn't trusted, what kind of really transpired, just again laying out the facts so nicely. That then, at least pretty much how I followed it, brought me to Crowley in India, and this was kind of an interesting point of view again, that many points Crowley kind of discovered that a lot of what he was receiving as Indian tantric knowledge turned out to be pretty much his own knowledge that's kind of just migrated over to that area. But this becomes a very interesting kind of piece, because it also moves into the idea of his initial perspectives of the holy guardian angel, and how that then translates over to the idea of samadhi and the samadhi state, and the correlation between these views and these concepts, as well as the views and concepts also kind of echo throughout these books of Crowley's views upon what spirit really is, and how those perspectives really are in terms of his interpretation of sex magic, which we see far more covered in Crowley in America. Here is very much how the influences of Hinduism and the tantrics and stuff basically had on him in that sense. So it goes East Young Man, Madame Blavatsky in India, Theosophy in the Kalen, How India Became Aryans, Fall Out of and Fall In, Alan Bennett in Ceylon, The Beast in Colombia, Tukedi, Yoga, The Essentials, Big Games, Small Games, Dubala, Cigara, and a word that I'm not going to butcher right now, Thomas William Rice Davis. Again, quite nicely broken into pieces. The Aim is Being, Calcutta, Madura, Burma, The Train Boat to Paddle Steam, Across India. I would love this entire series to just be made into a TV series. Return of Ceylon to Bolesky, The Works, The Arrogate Dhamma, The Science of Buddhism, the exploration of that. And you can see nicely how these ideas progressively added to his philosophies towards the development of Thelema. The Works, so then The Works 2, The Ascension Day, The Pentecost, Pansil, Jhana Yoga, The Mahatma Guru Yoga, Yogi, the Raja Yoga Philosophy, and Sabapati System, Kangenjunga, all the way through these nice little kind of journey backs. And then we get into part 2, where again that's that exploration of the ideas of samadhi, how that kind of opened up and dawned upon him. I Came from God, The World to Save, 1907, 777, and book 4, The Tree of Life, and a lot of these kind of yogic philosophies, how that affected and worked into his perceptions. Sit Down, Shut Up, and Get Out, The Guru in Action, Yoga of Yahoos and Yellow Bellies, Yoga and the War, The Coiled Splendor, The Secret TypeScript, The Latent Light Culture, Independence. Again, another very well researched as expected piece. again, this is not something that you're going to go to and find like some kind of deep magical insight, although you may be able to, the astute reader could probably glean that from Crowley's life and travels, but it does help put in perspective his process, his journey, how that kind of formulates as you move forward to it. Just beautiful, again, like those depictions of the location and the period to really just help immerse you into that period, so you're seeing the perspective. And this was also interesting, again, some of the failures that we talk about in the interview, and it was here where he made the climb to K2, which was a failure, which is also one of those great failures of his life that did affect Crowley in many ways. And many would also say it was these kind of climbs to these extreme heights that ultimately ended up being part of his end of days, because the effects had in the aggravation of his bronchial position with his asthma. But then brings us into the most recent of the works, Aleister Crowley in England, The Return of the Great Beast. Let's get into this one. Pre-war, 1932 to 1939, never dull where Crowley is. Potted sex appeal, Justice Swift, The Unbelievable Terror, a mark in his kind of influence or his work or his journey between him and the Rosicrucian Order of Weimar. Bar 666, a banning process, or the when we liked him and didn't like him, as a country. Living in the Turkish Baths, a mark again. Seriously on the Path, Hitler and Germany according to the Protective Prisoner number 303, Cornwall, August 1938, King Kong King, Return of the Goethic Gourmet, Chikanji Jun. Then we move into part 2 where we pretty much hit the war period. Happy Dust, What Crowley Does This Year, England Does Next, Torgay, Great Magical Retirement, Robed as a Warrior, Rudolf Hess, In the Hour of Battle, Winston plus Shigar's Defeatist Activities of Really Serious Groups, Cambridge Spy, I Dreamed Time, Monstrous Worlds, The Duke's Street Bomb, The Bell, The New Gnostic Church, almost, The Book of Thoth, and the release of that, Nancy Gunnard, and then finally, Retirement. This... Again, if you've seen the TV series Strange Angel and you've kind of explored that, if that was your introduction to Crowley, you'll kind of see those scenes where Crowley was almost on the other side of the world and Jack Canfield, where they were trying to have that communication. That also depicts where he was, at pretty much the end of his days. He wasn't somebody that really managed his finances very well. In fact, he was quite generous, if we can call that, with his money, because he was never in a position where he needed to develop those skills. The Death of the King, Netherwood, the Chinese Ambassador, Eddies of a Bastion, Babylon Now, the Universe, and then the chronology from 1875 to 1937, Crowley's life before he returned to England. Again, a very, very kind of just look and a fair account historically on the man, without what I could tell is very much biased. Respect, no doubt, that was definitely given. Even the journey with Kenneth Grant, and his relationship with him, and I believe Kenneth Grant is a secretary at one point, as well as to Israel Regarded, which we find in one of the other pieces of the work, the creation of the Book of Thoth, and the speaking of how those paintings of the art kind of came out, and again how he was almost like not recognized with the exhibit, and really what kind of transpired in between that. A very interesting, honest and fair look towards the man's life. Again, many people can talk about Crowley's life, but there's no point in looking at just one single perspective of the individual's work and making an assessment out of that, because there's been many points of great failure, and definitely a tale of tragedy in many kind of aspects. But for somebody that has lived such an outrageous, out there life, willing to really take on the unique challenge of being pushed all the way out of the accepted status quo, and still having accomplished as much as Crowley did as an artist, as a poet, as a philosopher, as a writer, it is definitely a collection for the serious collector. and the serious researcher in the Crowley. And even if you are a practitioner of Thelema, or a member of the OTO, I do believe that you will find rich values in better understanding the man behind those ideas, and those ideas in context to the times, instead of just the misinterpretation of modern day ideas. I especially enjoy it because we're familiar with his rejection of some of Freud's ideas and Freud himself, but his actual affiliation, appreciation of Jung, and how that idea of the unconscious really influenced him in his work. He was familiar about that, or affected by that, as well as his other perspectives of working internally, as how many people can pretty much paint him in this bad light, as Crowley was such a bad person or a pervert. The fact of the matter is, there was no real kind of criminal behavior in terms of his stuff. If anything, he was somebody that discovered the darkness of his own being and found ways to express it, and thus integrate it in itself. So again, for the serious collector, you're not going to really find great rituals or anything like that in here if that's what you're after. But if you're looking for an honest account of the man's life, you cannot do better than this collection. Do check it out if that is your interest field.